AITAH for calling the police after my wife assaulted our daughter. My wife and I, after 20 years of marriage, are at a crossroads following an incident in December. We have two children, one 7M and one 5F, who are typically flexing their independence, though they're both really good kids. Honest, smart, talented in their own ways. I'm going to be deliberately light on background here in order to keep this short-ish. I've suffered chronic major depressive disorder my entire adult life, and one of the major failings of my condition is I don't cope with chronic stress well at all. Good in a crisis, quick to act rationally when needed, but I tend to shut down with chronic stress. After 9 years in a very stressful role, I resigned in November to take a break before looking for something less stressful. Last day was the Friday before Christmas. Historically, I've been the earner, the creative, the voice of reason and the more academic achiever. Mount Wife has always been the well-organized one, as well as the better cook. She'd consistently been in high-level administrative roles since we met and earns a good income. She's generally an excellent parent when it comes to the day-to-day stuff, organizing holidays, social activities, all of that stuff. However, she has an angry streak, and I recently come to the realization that she's quite the covert narcissist. Over the last few years we've clashed quite a bit about how we raise the kids. In the last few months we've clashed heavily about our daughter's new BF. He's a very nice kid, respectful, sweet to my daughter. They're madly in love it seems. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, he has altered our daughter's perspective on what a normal family looks like and how it operates. For perspective, my wife has generally ruled the family, and generally has things her way. I tend to give in whenever there's a conflict as I like to keep the peace, so the kids have never really enjoyed the flexibility or independence they'd like. Now that our daughter has seen how different, read better, it can be, she's rebelled. Late last year she left to stay with her BF's family without our knowledge. After several days of us trying to convince her to return home, she only agreed to return if changes were made in the home. Evidently, the changes weren't substantial enough and only a few weeks later, she left again. I was sympathetic to our daughter's position while my wife started referring to her as lost, and told me I'd have to deal with her in future. She came home, but spent as much time away as possible as she wasn't comfortable at home. This prompted me to initiate a discussion with my wife about our poor communication. I suggested a marriage counselor to help us reconcile our differences, and help us find a healthier means to communicate, as we usually spiral into her losing her temper, and me giving in to keep the peace. Not healthy. Over the remainder of the year I'd suggested this numerous times, as we'd grown increasingly distant, to the point I'd spend nights sleeping on the couch. I had also recommended she look into anger management some years ago, when our son went through this phase. Ironically, her response to this was, "Go ****** yourself." After discussing my mental state with my doctor, he recommended I should talk to a psychologist. So I'd had 2 sessions in December to address depression and burnout, as well as the state of our marriage. Bear in mind that I'd just resigned, and was under ridiculous pressure to hand over 9 years of my role to 2 staff who were just not equipped to take it on. On Christmas Day I put on my best brave face, and tried to enjoy the day with the wife's family. Food, drink, I tried to keep in the spirit. However, with the work stress I'd suffered, and leaving my role only days before, plus the lack of sleep, over the recent months I simply wasn't feeling it after about 5 hours and decided to take myself home. That evening the wife said things needed to change. I agreed, and again suggest a marriage counselor. She again refused as she's convinced I'm the only one with a problem. She's perfect. I'm the one who needs to change. I said, I can't go to marriage counseling for both of us, and that's where it was left. We didn't talk much after that. We'd made no plans to nor any annual trip over the school holidays. Australia, the long break is over Christmas in January. It was tense and I found it extremely difficult to talk to her as every conversation about anything meaningful became a fight. So, the incident occurs before New Year's Day. Our daughter is at the train station after seeing her BF that day and called to see if one of us can collect her to save the 20-minute walk. Being a Sunday, the buses aren't very regular in our suburb, so the wife goes to get her. Evidently in the car on the trip home the wife mentions at her sister's house, while our daughter says she's already made plans with her BF as we didn't have any. I later found out my wife had made plans on Christmas Day for the family and simply hadn't told us. I had also known about my daughter's plans, but hadn't mentioned them to my wife as I wasn't aware we had any other plans. They're arguing about it as they walk in the front door, and I'm sitting quietly on the couch. We had a 3-way argument about who knew what and what we were going to do. I side with my daughter, and support the notion that she keeps her plans, which is met with daggers from my wife. So she focuses on me, and the fact that I haven't supported her position, which develops into an argument about how we don't communicate. When I point out that the reason we don't communicate is it always ends in a fight, she decides to follow my daughter into her bedroom to verbally attack her next. I'm bracing for the usual verbal tirade, followed by silent treatment for a few days. Then I hear my daughter scream from her bedroom. I leap into action and round the door to see my daughter on the floor in a defensive position with arms around her head, my wife standing over her, with blind rage on her face. I grab at my wife's wrist and scream at her to get out, though she quickly pulls away. I think I must have made the subconscious realization that if I continued this line of action, it will be me in the back of a police car, so instead I repeatedly order my wife to get out, without leaving the room. At this stage I don't actually know what's happened as I didn't see anything. She eventually leaves the room and we're arguing in the lounge room, all the while I'm ordering her to leave the house, knowing full well that when she gets this angry it takes considerable time for her to calm down. I just want her out so I can see to my daughter. She refuses to leave, even after I threaten to call the police, so I tell my daughter to join me and her brother in the front room while I make the call. The Christmas tree suffers her wrath next and shards of glass from ornaments now litter the lounge room. After several minutes on the phone, all the while I'm telling my wife I haven't given them any address details and can hang up at any moment, I eventually give the operator the address and details of the domestic violence. After I'm advised a unit is being dispatched and end the call, I let her know the police are on the way. I think she realized I wasn't bluffing and begins packing a bag in a rage, then leaves. Of course, I call the emergency line back and ask them to cancel the unit, but they advise that given the type of incident they will probably come anyway. After the incident it's the usual reports, statements, intervention order, court hearings, etc. 3 of us are now living in the house, and the wife has very little contact. I don't know the outcome of the criminal hearing, as we weren't required to be present. We've had a few face-to-face meetings to discuss what to do next, and I've also made it clear that this is the end of our marriage. I've suggested that an apology to our daughter would be a good place to start, though nearly 6 weeks later none is forthcoming. At our last meeting I wanted to discuss how she can come home and fix things for the kids' sake, but was struck by her stance on the incident. She asked me if I regret calling the police, and if I'm sorry for how it's affected her. For perspective, I learned later that my wife had slapped my daughter in the face, thrown her to the floor and kicked her before I entered the room. Of course, in the calm light of a new day I absolutely felt that I'd done the right thing to protect my daughter. However, my wife believes we could have handled all this without the police involved and that she is the victim. She's hiding the details of the incident from her family to protect my reputation with her family. There are a couple of other little nuggets of conversation she'd relayed which indicate that the people she has talked to about this are all shocked, as I've always been such a gentleman in the past. She's playing the victim card hard. Finally, I'll be the first to admit I'm not the perfect husband or father. Depression and COVID have certainly taken a lot from me, and I do wish I could be better than I am. I have no doubt that my condition has had a considerable impact on my wife's state of mind. I'm also acutely aware that it's really not easy for you folks to make impartial judgments based solely on the statements of one party. That said, AITAH for calling the police.